The release of the Epstein files sparked a wave of online obsession, but one reaction stood apart from the noise. When Joe Rogan discovered his own name buried in the documents, he wasn't shaken because he had something to hide. He was disturbed by what he uncovered after digging deeper into the material. Rogan spoke openly about the horrifying implications hidden within the records, allegations of powerful individuals who allegedly treated human suffering as entertainment, people accused of participating in acts so cruel and ritualistic that they sounded less like modern scandals and more like stories pulled from history's darkest chapters. What unsettled him most was the possibility that these abuses were not relics of the past, but part of an ongoing system operating behind enormous wealth and influence. His comments shifted attention away from Jeffrey Epstein himself and toward a more unsettling idea, that Epstein may never have been the real center of power. Instead, he appeared to function as a facilitator, connecting elites, billionaires, celebrities, and influential figures inside a network far larger than the public originally understood. The conversation intensified in February 2026 when the Department of Justice released millions of pages tied to Epstein's operation, including photographs, flight records, videos, and internal documentation. Predictably, the internet exploded with speculation as people searched for familiar names linked to the scandal. Among those names was Joe Rogan's. During a discussion on his podcast, Rogan explained that years earlier, physicist Lawrence Krauss had attempted to introduce him to Epstein. The request immediately raised red flags. After a quick online search revealed Epstein's 2008 conviction involving a minor, Rogan rejected the idea outright and refused any meeting. That single decision later gave Rogan unusual credibility when discussing the files publicly. He wasn't speaking as someone connected to Epstein's circle, but as someone who deliberately avoided it. And once he began examining the documents in detail, his focus turned toward the individuals he believed operated above Epstein. Wealthy figures whose identities and influence appeared woven throughout the records. Yet while public attention centered on politicians, financiers, and redacted names, another figure quietly surfaced throughout the documents with striking frequency: Naomi Campbell. According to the files, Campbell's name reportedly appeared hundreds of times across flight manifests, party guest lists, and social connections linked to Epstein's world. She was allegedly present at gatherings inside his homes, attended exclusive dinners, and appeared in records tied to luxury yacht events where underage girls were also present. What made the situation even more controversial were earlier public statements in which Campbell claimed she had no knowledge of Epstein's crimes. Critics argue that the breadth of her documented association raises difficult questions about how much those within Epstein's social circle truly knew, and who may still be shielding deeper secrets from public view. The deeper people dug into the Epstein files, the more one unsettling question began to emerge. If Naomi Campbell truly had years of proximity to Epstein's world, what information might she still be carrying? And what would happen if she ever decided to speak publicly about it? That question has lingered largely untouched, even as millions of pages from the 2026 DOJ release continue to be dissected online. Among the outlets examining the material, the New York Times reportedly focused closely on Campbell's connection to Epstein. What surfaced was far more extensive than a passing social encounter or occasional celebrity appearance. Her name appeared nearly 300 times throughout the records. The documents allegedly included emails involving Campbell directly, communications referencing her, flight records, scheduling details, and testimony connected to Epstein's wider network. But one particular message, an email sent by Ghislaine Maxwell, drew intense scrutiny because of what it appeared to imply. The paper trail paints a picture of an unusually close and sustained relationship with Epstein's inner circle. According to the release communications, Campbell repeatedly requested access to Epstein's private jet over a span of years. Records also suggest she coordinated visits to his Manhattan residence through his longtime assistant, Leslie Groff, while sharing personal travel and scheduling information with Epstein's staff. One exchange from 2010 stood out for its level of familiarity. In the message, Groff reportedly informed Epstein that Campbell was in the middle of a facial appointment and would return the call afterward. Critics point to that detail as evidence of a relationship far more personal and ongoing than a distant celebrity acquaintance. Epstein's staff were not merely aware of her existence, they appeared deeply involved in the rhythm of her daily availability. Another email, dated 2015, intensified those questions. In it, Campbell allegedly discussed travel logistics with Groff before ending the message with a direct statement expressing her desire to see Epstein. What made the exchange particularly controversial was the timing. By then, Epstein's criminal history and prior conviction were already public knowledge worldwide. Still, the most debated document connected to Campbell was not one of her own emails, but a message allegedly sent to her by Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell, now serving a federal prison sentence related to child trafficking crimes, reportedly offered Campbell 2 playmates in the email. That phrase became explosive because of the broader context surrounding Maxwell's conduct and the language investigators say was often used within Epstein's circle. Combined with victim testimony and the criminal findings against Maxwell, critics and online investigators argued the wording carried implications far darker than it appeared on the surface. For many observers, the significance of these records lies less in celebrity gossip and more in what they may reveal about the social networks surrounding Epstein, networks that allegedly extended into entertainment, politics, finance, and elite international circles for years without serious scrutiny. The controversy surrounding Naomi Campbell intensified not simply because her name appeared in the Epstein records, but because of the growing gap between the documented timeline and her public explanations. Critics argue that the evidence points to years of close interaction within Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's social circle, while Campbell has maintained she was unaware of the abuse allegations until much later. That contradiction has become one of the central tensions in the broader conversation. One of the most discussed moments tied to the case dates back to May 31, 2001, Naomi Campbell's 31st birthday celebration aboard a luxury yacht near San Remo, Italy. The event gathered some of the wealthiest and most recognizable figures in elite European society. Among the attendees were Formula One executive Flavio Briatore, who was romantically involved with Campbell at the time, along with Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and several high-profile guests from business and entertainment circles. But years later, attention shifted away from the glamour of the event and toward a single teenager present that evening, Virginia Giuffre. Giuffre, who was 17 at the time, later described the experience in interviews, legal testimony, and published writings. She recalled arriving at the yacht with Epstein and Maxwell and feeling visibly out of place among adults dressed for an upscale social gathering. In photographs from the event, she appears wearing a pink tank top while surrounded by formally dressed guests, an image that later became symbolic in discussions about how openly vulnerable young girls were allegedly moved through elite spaces without intervention. According to Giuffre's account, the birthday party was not simply another celebrity gathering. She alleged that Epstein arranged exploitative encounters connected to that night and later stated publicly that she believed people within the social circle were aware that something was deeply wrong. Among the names she referenced was Naomi Campbell, whom she described as being especially close to Maxwell. Photographs from the celebration became heavily scrutinized after Giuffre's allegations gained international attention. In some of those images, Campbell can reportedly be seen interacting with or looking toward Giuffre. Supporters of Giuffre argue the teenager's presence should have raised obvious concerns, while Campbell has consistently denied having knowledge of Epstein's criminal conduct or understanding who Giuffre was at the time. Campbell later stated that the event itself had been organized primarily through Briatore and insisted she had no awareness of the abuse taking place within Epstein's network. However, Giuffre's testimony painted a far different picture, one she repeated consistently for nearly 2 decades despite intense public scrutiny and legal battles. Giuffre died by suicide in April 2025 at the age of 41. Months later, her memoir Nobody's Girl was released posthumously. In the book, she revisited the yacht party in painful detail, describing how isolated and objectified she felt that evening. Reflecting on the photographs years later, she wrote that the images made the imbalance painfully obvious, a teenager standing among powerful adults while no one appeared to question why she was there. Her story became central to the public understanding of Epstein's operation because she continued speaking even as many of the individuals she accused remained influential and publicly celebrated. While Giuffre spent years fighting court battles, giving testimony, and enduring backlash, many members of the social world she described continued their careers largely untouched. The timeline became even harder for critics to ignore after Epstein's 2008 conviction for soliciting a minor became public knowledge worldwide. By that point, his status as a registered sex offender was extensively covered in the media. For many observers, that raised a difficult question. How could anyone closely connected to Epstein's social environment after 2008 claim complete ignorance about who he was and what he had been accused of? Once Jeffrey Epstein's 2008 conviction became public, the debate surrounding people in his social orbit changed dramatically. For critics, the issue was no longer whether associates knew about allegations before his arrest. The more pressing question became what choices they made afterward, whether they distanced themselves or continued maintaining ties despite the public record. According to documents later released by the DOJ, Naomi Campbell's connection to Epstein did not end after his conviction. Records reportedly place her at a dinner inside Epstein's New York mansion in 2009, only months after he was released from custody. Also present at that gathering was Prince Andrew, a detail many observers viewed as symbolic of how certain influential figures continued socializing with Epstein even after his criminal case became widely known. The following years added further scrutiny. In 2010, Campbell and her then-partner, Russian billionaire Vladislav Doronin, were reportedly part of a luxury Nile River trip in Egypt that included Epstein. That same year, records suggest Epstein attended Campbell's Fashion for Relief charity function and was later seen at high-profile social events connected to her circle, including gatherings linked to Dolce & Gabbana in Paris. What critics found especially difficult to reconcile were communications from years later. Emails contained in the released files allegedly show Campbell contacting Epstein's office in 2016 regarding access to his private plane. Internal messages between Epstein staff members described her repeatedly following up about the arrangements and expressing concern because she had no backup plan if the flight could not be secured. To many observers, those exchanges suggested a relationship that extended well beyond occasional acquaintance. By that point, Epstein's status as a convicted sex offender had been public knowledge for nearly a decade. Yet the communications appeared to indicate continued trust, familiarity, and reliance between Campbell and Epstein's organization long after most public figures had begun distancing themselves. Another deeply controversial aspect of the FBI records involved allegations that Epstein used Campbell's celebrity status while recruiting underage girls. One victim reportedly stated that Epstein promised opportunities connected to the fashion industry and referenced his personal relationship with Campbell as part of that pitch. According to testimony, he specifically mentioned Victoria's Secret modeling opportunities while presenting himself as someone closely tied to elite fashion circles. For investigators and critics alike, that detail carried disturbing implications. The argument was not merely that Epstein casually mentioned a famous name, but that he allegedly leveraged genuine social relationships with high-profile celebrities to build credibility and lure vulnerable teenagers into his network. As public attention intensified around the released files, Joe Rogan became one of the most vocal media figures discussing the material. After reviewing portions of the millions of pages released in 2026, Rogan described the revelations in deeply emotional terms during his podcast conversations. What appeared to disturb him most was not only the criminal behavior itself, but the possibility that systems of power, influence, and protection may have allowed such conduct to continue unchecked for years. Rogan reflected on how history is filled with examples of powerful groups engaging in shocking abuses while ordinary people dismiss those stories as relics of darker eras. The Epstein case, in his view, forced people to confront the unsettling possibility that exploitation and moral corruption at elite levels may still exist in modern society in ways many prefer not to acknowledge. Joe Rogan's reaction to the Epstein files carried weight for many people because he was not approaching the material like a casual internet commentator chasing headlines. Over the years, Rogan has interviewed world leaders, influential entrepreneurs, scientists, and public figures from nearly every corner of power and culture. So when he spoke with visible unease about what he believed the documents revealed, listeners paid attention. What disturbed him most was not simply the confirmation that Jeffrey Epstein had committed horrific crimes. It was the broader picture emerging from the records, a portrait of a man who appeared deeply connected, financially supported, and consistently protected by powerful individuals whose identities and influence stretched far beyond Epstein himself. To Rogan and many others examining the files, Epstein no longer looked like an isolated predator operating alone. Instead, he appeared to function inside a much larger ecosystem of wealth, privilege, and access. The most controversial question became not who Epstein was, but who enabled him and why certain names allegedly remained shielded for so long. This is where Naomi Campbell's connection becomes part of a wider narrative rather than just a celebrity association. Critics argue that someone with documented ties to Epstein's circle spanning more than a decade may have had exposure to influential figures operating around him, individuals whose names investigators, journalists, and lawmakers reportedly fought to uncover in the released records. One figure repeatedly linked to that larger power structure is Leslie Wexner, the billionaire founder of Victoria's Secret and one of the wealthiest businessmen in modern American history. Wexner's relationship with Epstein went far beyond ordinary business dealings. Epstein was granted extraordinary control over parts of Wexner's financial empire, including power of attorney, and was given access to Wexner's lavish Manhattan mansion, the same property later tied to numerous allegations and investigative findings. That mansion also became one of the central social hubs connected to Epstein's network. According to records and reports, it hosted gatherings attended by politicians, celebrities, financiers, and prominent cultural figures, including Naomi Campbell. The controversy surrounding Wexner intensified further during public scrutiny of the DOJ documents. Lawmakers and investigators reportedly questioned why Wexner's name appeared openly thousands of times throughout the files, yet was allegedly redacted in a specific document identifying potential co-conspirators. To critics, that selective concealment suggested more than a simple clerical oversight. The fashion industry itself also became a major focus of attention because investigators and victims alleged Epstein used it as a gateway for recruitment. Young girls were reportedly promised modeling opportunities, introductions to elite agencies, and access to high-profile fashion circles. Victoria's Secret, because of its enormous cultural influence at the time, repeatedly surfaced in discussions about how Epstein cultivated credibility with aspiring models. According to testimony and FBI materials, Epstein often referenced his connections to famous figures within fashion, including Naomi Campbell, to gain trust and present himself as someone with legitimate access to powerful opportunities. That detail mattered because Campbell was not merely another celebrity on the periphery of the industry. During that era, she was one of the most influential supermodels in the world, deeply embedded in the highest levels of fashion, luxury branding, and celebrity culture. Critics argue that Epstein's ability to invoke names like hers helped reinforce the illusion that he belonged among elite insiders. The discussion surrounding exploitation within fashion circles was not entirely new, however. In 2001, the same year as Campbell's yacht birthday party attended by Epstein and Maxwell, Dutch supermodel Karen Mulder made explosive allegations during a French television appearance. Her claims about abuse and misconduct within elite modeling circles shocked audiences at the time, though many of her statements were dismissed or ignored by the broader industry. Looking back, some observers now argue those warnings were part of a much larger pattern that the public failed to fully confront until years later, after the Epstein scandal forced renewed scrutiny onto the hidden dynamics of power operating behind wealth, celebrity, and influence. Karen Mulder's name has resurfaced in recent discussions surrounding the fashion industry and the Epstein network because of claims she made decades before the scandal exploded into public view. Mulder, a Dutch supermodel who worked alongside Naomi Campbell during the height of the supermodel era, publicly alleged in the early 2000s that parts of the modeling industry operated as a pipeline connecting young women to wealthy and influential men. During a televised interview in France, Mulder claimed that executives within elite model management exploited models, pressured women into sexual arrangements, and maintained environments where manipulation and coercion were normalized. She even alleged that some women were kept compliant through drug use. At the time, her accusations were largely dismissed. The interview faded from mainstream attention, and Mulder herself was frequently portrayed in the media as unstable rather than treated as someone raising serious allegations worthy of investigation. Years later, after the Epstein files and broader trafficking revelations came to light, some observers began revisiting Mulder's statements with a different perspective. To critics of the industry, her comments no longer appeared isolated or implausible but instead seemed connected to larger patterns involving power, exploitation, and the use of elite social networks to shield abusive behavior. Within that context, Naomi Campbell's role became part of a broader conversation about the fashion world's relationship with wealth and influence. Campbell was not merely another model in the system. She stood at the very top of it during the late 1990s and early 2000s, representing the glamour, exclusivity, and access associated with high fashion's inner circles. At the same time, Campbell's public image was repeatedly overshadowed by a long history of assault allegations and legal incidents. Between the late 1990s and 2000s, she faced multiple convictions related to physical altercations involving employees and staff members, including assistants and household workers. Critics argued that these incidents revealed a behavioral pattern that powerful industry connections often helped soften or overlook. Another major controversy emerged in 2010 when Campbell testified before the International Criminal Court in The Hague during proceedings against former Liberian President Charles Taylor. Taylor stood accused of fueling violent conflicts in West Africa through the trade of so-called blood diamonds, conflicts linked to widespread atrocities and mass civilian deaths. Campbell was called to testify over allegations that Taylor had given her rough diamonds during a gathering hosted in South Africa connected to Nelson Mandela. On the witness stand, she described being awakened during the night by men delivering a pouch containing stones she later suspected came from Taylor. However, prosecutors challenged inconsistencies in her account and questioned whether she had been fully truthful during her testimony. At one point, prosecutors openly suggested she was attempting to shield Taylor from scrutiny. Years later, Campbell's associations again drew public attention after allegations against Sean Diddy Combs became widely publicized following Cassie Ventura's lawsuit. Before those accusations surfaced, Campbell had publicly celebrated and socialized with Combs, including participating in high-profile birthday festivities in 2023. After the lawsuit became public, Online observers noticed that references and photos tied to those celebrations reportedly disappeared from social media accounts without explanation. For critics, these repeated associations, whether involving Epstein, Charles Taylor, or Combs, contributed to a larger narrative about proximity to powerful and controversial men. For many people following this case, the unresolved documents represent more than sealed records or delayed disclosures. They symbolize unanswered questions that victims spent years trying to bring into public view. Supporters of Virginia Giuffre's fight argue that as long as millions of pages remain unreleased, the full scope of the Epstein network and the people connected to it may still be hidden from accountability. The debate surrounding Naomi Campbell sits at the center of that uncertainty. Some believe she could eventually become an important witness capable of shedding light on the influential circles surrounding Epstein. Others suspect she will continue denying meaningful knowledge of what occurred despite the growing body of documents, testimony, and public scrutiny tied to her name. What remains undeniable is that the story is still unfolding. Investigators, journalists, lawmakers, and online researchers continue combing through records, flight logs, emails, and testimony in search of connections that have yet to be fully explained. Many believe additional names and relationships connected to Epstein's operation have still not entered public discussion. For supporters of survivors like Virginia Giuffre, the larger issue has always been truth and accountability, not only for Epstein himself, but for the systems and powerful individuals who may have enabled his world to function for decades. In their view, the release of documents is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a broader reckoning that is still developing. I prefer this response.